10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope everyone is safe and is doing good. My name is Vaishnavi Singh, and I'm a final year BTech student pursuing information technology at KISAR. Thank you so much, and I'm really honored and excited to be your host for today, and I know you're excited about the same. Without further delay, let me just walk you through the agenda for today's program. We have two sessions by industry leaders and a trailing question and answer round with each of our speakers. You can post all of your doubts, comments, and questions in the YouTube comment box. Our team is on standby to answer them. All right, without any further delay, let's dive deep into the sessions lined up for Make It In today. So let me invite our first speaker for the day, Hari Shankar.
Hello.
Hi, Hari. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm
First
fine.
of all,
I'm great.
it's been a great event. I've been following all the updates, and you folks are doing an amazing job. Kudos to the entire team, and kudos to everybody that's
Thank you
participating in the
so
event.
much. Thank you so much. All right, so let me introduce you first to our viewers and attendees. A coder by passion with a die-hard predilection for open source, Hari has a penchant to design, develop, maintain, monetize, and support websites as well as web applications. In a career spanning 10 years, Hari has been deeply involved in the complete development lifecycle of over 50 plus websites for diverse clients, including top government organizations and Fortune 500 companies. Hari's primary expertise and overwhelming passion lies in the WordPress, which is the world's most popular and perhaps the most loved content management system. Prior to joining Automatic in 2016, Hari has worked in a diverse set of domains, including retail banking, print journalism, education, project management, and social media marketing, to name a few. A former columnist at The Hindu, he has also won awards for his work, including the runner up position at the 2011 Mindful Leadership Award from the University of Dayton, Ohio. I request everyone to please please join me in welcoming Hari to talk on product management for distributed teams. Welcome to Make It In, Hari. Over to you.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. So, as I was saying earlier, it's been an amazing. I've been following everything that's happening with Megaton, and it's been an honor to actually present before you all. So, without further ado, let me quickly start my session. I'm going to need a quick moment to share my screen. I hope you all don't mind as I do that. All right, I'm getting there. Okay. Perfect. Awesome. So today I'm going to take a session on the topic product management for distributed teams. Before I go forward, I think Vaishnavi, thank you so much for giving me doing such a great intro about me. So I'm not going to I don't like doing it, so I don't want to blow my own trumpet there. But I just like to introduce the company that I work for, which is called Automatic. So Automatic has been a distributed company from day one of its existence. We've been featured immensely for our work on distributed work. Basically, we've been distributed from day one, and we are distributed. We don't have an office actually. We've been featured in the Harvard Business Review. There's actually been a book about us that was written. It's called The Year Without Pants. It's a very interesting book. But what I'm trying to say is, I've been working remote for the past 5 years with Automatic, and I've seen how remote work and product management is done. So in this session, I'm essentially going to talk to you about how to manage products remotely. Now, first of all, let me make a few disclaimers. After attending the session, you're not going to be a product management expert. Product management is a vast science. You would need to probably do it on your own to learn it. And I'm not going to make any any claims that this session will make you a distributed product management expert. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share some tips that I've learned managing products in the 5 years that I've worked remotely. So as I start, I just want to share this quick quote from the HR head of Twitter. And she basically, you can read the quote there. She basically says that work is never going to be the same. Unfortunately, this is a side effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Everybody is moving to work from home. But in fact, I see remote work or distributed work as an opportunity. it offers immense freedom. And product managers have a lot of opportunity in this pandemic. And as you can see, major companies like Twitter, Microsoft, they're all moving to a distributed model. So when you as a product manager, or as a person that manages the distributed team, or simply as a person that works that's on a hackathon, so I like all of you participating in the hackathon, working this actually, in a way, you participating in a distributed hackathon is a great way to learn product management or distributed product management. So I'm going to offer you some tips in this session to help you be an efficient distributed product manager. So this is the way forward, and I'm glad that you're all here participating in this hackathon, because I think this is going to be a great exposure for you that wants to go forward, especially those of you who are looking forward to a career in the software industry, because this is really going to prepare you for what's coming up next. So as you can see, Twitter, Microsoft, even our own homegrown TCS and Infosys, everybody is going to a distributed model. So you need certain sets of skills, and you need certain sets of things that you need to keep in mind in order to succeed with a distributed team, and that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. So these are the few things that I'm going to discuss today. The first is building an open culture, the importance of communication, task management, accountability, and feedback. And finally, I'm going to share an example from the WordPress open source project to show you how this whole thing works, how you can manage a product without actually needing to meet your colleagues. All right, so let's move forward without further ado. Let's start with building an open culture. So what is an open culture? This, first of all, this applies to everybody, even if you're on a hackathon like this, or if you're a startup, a group of people, random group of people from all across the world who are building a software product of your own, or if you're a full-fledged company, if you're a company CEO, or if you're managing a distributed team to build a product, this applies to all of you. This is the biggest advice that I've got to give you today. If you are starting off your company, it's going to be easy for you, but if you already established a company, it's going to be difficult. But please work on building an open and sustainable work culture. Now, how can you do that? First thing, as I've written, is here is to maintain transparency and openness. So this is extremely easy if you're starting off. So set expectations. Everything that you do in your company is going to be as transparent and as open as possible. Or if it comes to the hackathon, it applies to participants of the team. So each team member is going to share everything that they're going to do, and each team member is going to be as transparent and as open with each other. There's no walls really. So if you're starting a remote company, everything, including the revenue that you make each day or each hour, should be public to everybody. I know that sounds like a very radical idea, but we've been doing it at Automattic for the past 15 years, and I can tell you it works. So being transparent with each other in every domain possible, that is the first ingredient to success in a distributed company or a distributed team. That's the first thing. The second thing is make sure that your team is friendly, fun, and informal. So as Heath Ledger's Joker character said, why so serious? And there's a famous Bugs Bunny quote that I always like to share. The quote goes something like, don't live your life seriously. You're not going to get out of it alive anyway. So that's the whole point. So as you can see, in traditional office structures, everybody is very serious, very uptight. So we are living in very tough times. I mean, it's the COVID-19 pandemic all over. So let's not be uptight. Let's not be serious. Let's not be stuck with ourselves. Let's be open, friendly. So doing that from day one is going to make a huge difference. So it makes sure that all of you, like all of the colleagues, all of the team members, they trust each other. They are friendly with each other. How can you do this? How can you make sure that your company is transparent, open, and friendly? So it could be anything. Like you can do friendly banters. You can share gifts. You can probably do fun stuff together online, collaborate online. So those are a lot of things that you can do. And the third thing is shared values. So I believe that every company should have its own set of values. So it would be a good thing to actually sort of work on a set of values. So what is going to be your set of values? So this is not lip service. This is not something that you write somewhere in your company handbook, but you never look back. But these are things that you need to take seriously. So for instance, being honest and make sure that you are as collaborative as possible. So those are some great values that you can keep in mind. And finally, this is something I'll talk about later as we go forward. Make sure that your team appreciates giving and receiving feedback, because this is extremely important. As you work remotely, as your team works remotely, feedback is going to be the key driver that's going to take you to success. All right, so let's move forward. The next thing I want to talk to you about today is communication. So the company I work for, Automattic, we have this thing called the Automattic Creed. So that's like a set of guiding a few words that drive us. That is really the philosophy of our company, Automatic. So there's this line in the Automatic creed. It says, "Communication is oxygen." I repeat, communication is oxygen. So if to everybody that's working here on your hackathon, or to everybody who wants to make a distributed team, or to everybody who's working on a distributed team, this is one advice that I have to offer you today. Communication is oxygen. So for your distributed team to really succeed, for your product to really succeed, you should make sure that your communication is continual and exceptional, because it is essential for the success of your distributed product team. So how can you make sure that this can be done? The first thing is over communicate. Now, how do you over communicate? Please don't get me wrong. This is not over communication is not a bad thing. Over communication is a good thing. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm working on a product team, and I'm working on a specific module, and I have about 100 lines of code to write, and I've written 25 lines of code, and I'm stuck on something. It could be something very minor, but I share this in my team's Slack channel. That okay, I'm here, I'm stuck in this particular line, can somebody help me? Or I can just share a simple update saying that okay, I've just finished 50 lines of code, I'm feeling awesome, yay. So it could be anything. Another example of over communication is, let's say your lead is pinged you to say something, okay, why don't you work on this module as part of the code, or why don't you work on this feature? So you say, yes, I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to work on it. And then you keep reporting back to your lead, sharing each and every step of the progress. So communicate as much as you can, even if it's the little things. Go ahead and communicate it. There is no over communication. All over communication is great communication. So it's like, so back when Twitter came up, there used to be a running joke, like everybody used to tweet their bowel movements. So you should do that in this case, but maybe not in public, but maybe internally to your team members. Don't share about your bowel movements. So that's not a good thing. But on a serious note, do share about all your updates, all that's happening in your work life, what the progress is. Communicate as much as possible, because this is really the key to success. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is asynchronous communication. So this is especially valuable if you're a distributed team that is spread across the world. So the company I work for, we have people working at 60 countries all across the world. So I work on a very distributed team. I have colleagues from Portland, Oregon, and I have there's another teammate of mine from Tokyo, Japan. And my team lead, he's currently in Cape Town, South Africa. He's moving to Auckland, New Zealand in December. So it's going to be even more distributed. So how do you communicate in such cases, especially when everybody's so far diverse? The answer is asynchronous communication. Now, it even works with when your team is kind of close by or in the same time zone. Or I'm pretty sure that most of the teams working in this hackathon, you'll all be probably based in the same time zone. That is the Indian time zone, IST. But even so, asynchronous communication is great. What is asynchronous communication? So synchronous communication means you're talking with somebody and they give you an immediate reply. So I'm right. So let's say you're talking over somebody over Zoom. That is synchronous communication. Or you're directly chatting with somebody. That is also synchronous communication. Asynchronous communication means you share something to a person and the person replies whenever they have the bandwidth to do it. So in short, you send a message and you may not get the reply immediately. Now, the benefit of this is that communication is anyway happens really well. It allows people to really think what to reply. So let's say I'm asking you a question directly, or to everybody that's studying in colleges, you're the Viva, right? In your lab exams. So I need, or if let's say you're on an interview and the interviewer is asking you questions and you need to reply immediately, that's going to put in a lot of stress on you. But if you had the chance to wait, if you had the chance to think a bit and then reply, that's going to drastically improve the quality of your replies. Don't you agree with me? So not just that, it allows for a better quality of communication and better cadence of communication. So communication still happens, but you have the time to reply. You have the time to message. And that's a great thing about asynchronous communication. Now, this is also extremely important. I said communication is oxygen. I said over-communicate. So document everything. Every single thing you do, write a document about it. And here's a side note, practice your written communication, because that is extremely valuable. If you're not confident about writing things, practice writing. Create a blog, start a Medium account, whatever. Like create a blog, whatever. Just practice your written communication, and this will really help you document everything. Because in this COVID-19 age, when everybody needs to communicate with each other, you need to make sure that it's all written, because you are not meeting the other person directly. And when it's documented, it's going to make things. It's going to make life easy for every team members. Now, as you can see, I've said even the Zoom calls. So yeah, whenever you have a Zoom call with your team, make sure you publish it out in the open, publish the notes. It need not be super detailed. You need not write a line by line transcript of the conversation, but if you could share a very brief summary, that's perfect. So yes, keep calm and document everything, and even those Zoom calls. Now, another thing that I want to share is communication should always be in the open. So let's say you're a team of 10 people. There's a team member who tends to ping everybody directly. So they're having this conversation about the product, but the conversation actually happens between them both and nobody else knows about it, right? But there's a defect to this approach, because there are decisions. When you keep doing this, often decisions get made in these private channels and the other people don't get to know about it. This results in a sense of extreme distrust. So make sure that if it's provided it's not something sensitive, make sure that all conversations, even if it's something that's related to the product, anything, it all happens in an open channel. So that's another thing that I wanted to share. Right. So moving on, we've talked about communication. We've talked about the importance of having a great culture. Next thing is task management. Now, this is for everybody that's about to start working on a team. If you've already started working on something, it's okay. You can probably implement this in your upcoming projects. So you need to set very clear goals and deadlines before you start, and all of these need to be documented. Remember my point about documenting everything. So your goals need to be SMART. So this is a very popular management term, and I think it's used effectively in all the Scrum ideologies and things like that. So it's called a SMART goal. SMART goals mean specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So your goal should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So make sure that, so let's say you have a major task, break it down into small tasks. Make sure you're able to measure it. Like, how can we measure the success of a task? Make sure that the goals are attainable. Like, let's say I've set the goal of creating the next Facebook by next week. That is not attainable. So make sure that these goals are attainable and relevant. Let's say you're building a social networking app and you want to add you want to throw in a podcasting thing by the side. That may not really be relevant, even though it could be useful in the long run. So make sure that the things that you do are relevant. And finally, time-based. The example I said of shipping your social network in 1 week. Well, you may be able to do it, but you may not be able to do a great job with it. So make sure that all these goals are set and they are documented before you start. Right. Now, how do you go forward with the task management workflow? So there are essentially 4 stages here. I mean, I'm talking about the communication. The first stage is project management, high-level task management. So I spoke of the SMART goals. So this is for all the leads. So you can use apps like Trello, Asana, GitHub projects, etc., to make a list of all the tasks, like all the deadlines, all the goals. So this should be on the top. This should be on the top of the pyramid. The next level is high-level communication. So let's say you have a task and you're breaking it down into 4 or 5 smaller tasks. So there should be detailed discussions of each small task in a common communication platform. There are several ways to do it. So I can recommend a tool called Basecamp. It's a great tool. It's made by a company called 37 Signals. You don't even need to invest in something fancy. Even a Google Doc would do. Like, so write down everything, write down all the stages of the communication. And I can personally recommend the WordPress P2, so which is a tool that we use in our company. It's a free tool that's available in WordPress.com. So it allows you to create a blog-like thing, or even you can probably even create a private Facebook group to do that. And my personal recommendation for these high-level communications would be to avoid email by all means. So all communications that could be sent in email, they should live in a particular place. Like, so all the discussions that should happen in the comments. So it's like a social media, like your own private social media page. It could be a private LinkedIn group or private Facebook group or whatever. So all high-level communications, let's say, so you'll get a clear idea about it when I show the example that I spoke of. So those communications should happen there, and people should have those discussions in the open. Next is team chats. So there are tools like Slack, Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, and there's an open source platform called Matrix. So everybody that's working from home, you're probably aware of these tools. You probably use this already. These are really good for synchronous communications. So let's say you want to have a group chat with somebody. So these are great tools. But the problem is they are not exactly searchable. That's why you have these high-level communications tools. So these tools would be searchable. So let's say you want to go back on a discussion that took place in June 2020, or I don't know, June 2019. So you can simply go back to this tool. You can, if it's a P2, you can just scroll back, or if it's a Basecamp, if you're using Basecamp, you can just scroll back to that discussion and see, okay, this is what we discussed. These are the comments that we got. And finally, synchronous discussions for FaceTime. Yes, FaceTime is important. As in, I'm not talking about the Apple FaceTime thing, but getting to meet your team in person. That is extremely important. So ideally, in an ideal world, I would recommend distributed teams getting together at least once a year, like meeting in person. But in these COVID-19 times, I don't think that's really possible. But maybe in the future. But until then, try to do at least a Zoom call or a Google Meet call, or use whatever application that you want. There's tons of them. I've just mentioned these two because they're very popular. So do a weekly meeting, but then again, I'll talk about that in the next slide. I have a warning to say about that. And yeah, finally, if you're building an app or a product, use version control or a staging environment where everybody can collaborate. So GitHub, GitLab, and all those popular version control tools, they are great options for this. Yeah. So this is how you this is the entire product lifecycle, and here's how you use all the things. So the first stage, vision. This is when you add everything to the product roadmap. So this is for the leaders. The leaders, you add your goals in your Trello board or your Asana board or a Kanban board, whatever, and it's for everybody to view. And then you write in these long form tools. So you write the roadmap. So what is the project? What is part 1 going to be? What is part 2 going to be? What is part 3 going to be? So all of these will be discussed, published individually in each of these tools, and discussions will happen over there. Everything else, so the design, development, etc., that can happen in a combination of these asynchronous tools, in a combination of chat. So let's say you want to make a decision on something really fast. So then you jump on a Zoom call with somebody. Document everything. So the third set of steps, that is designing and development, that can happen on a combination of synchronous and asynchronous discussions. And finally, you ship the tool. So this is the entire process, and this is how, as a remote team, you can manage everything. Now, let me offer a final set of task management tips for you all. So my strong recommendation is, if you're building a big product, make sure you split it into small teams. I mean, this is kind of an obvious tip, but this is extremely important. And make sure that your teams are not big. So the experience that I've had from remote work is, like, if you have teams that are more than 10, there's a magical number. I think it's 8. I forgot, there was an article about it. I can't really place it, but I think the magical number is 8 or 10. So each team should not have more than 8 or 10 people. So the smaller the teams, the better. So split it into small teams. But if you're a small team, like a team of 5 people, don't worry too much about it. This is great. You're on a great thing. Now, the next step is extremely important. Do periodic check-ins. So this could be automated. So there would be a weekly post that comes up in the asynchronous task management tool that you're talking about, and each team member would share their personal update. Now, depending on how long the project, let's say it's a 6-month project, I would recommend doing a weekly update, or at least a monthly update. So a combination of a weekly plus a monthly update would be great. But for a hackathon, I would recommend doing a daily update. But if it's a 2-day thing, well, you're out of luck. But still, do some sort of regular updates. That's going to really help you. So each team member would share what they did. So this is what they did. So let's say if I'm a developer, I would say, I developed this module. I fixed this bug. I added this feature request. So if I'm a designer, I would say I designed this logo. I designed this UI interface. Things like that. Now, one last thing that I want to say about Zoom calls: do not, please, for the love of God, do not do daily Zoom calls, especially if you're a company. If you're a company for the long run. I mean, in case of a 2-day hackathon, it's fine. But if you're a big company, please, for the love of God, don't do it, because it's gonna completely ruin the morale of everybody. So I know a friend. He's working for a big 4 consulting company. I won't mention the name. So he mentioned to me the other day that he did about 8 hours of Zoom calls. It is absolutely pointless. I don't understand why they do it. Probably they are getting confused about how the whole COVID-19 situation is. But don't do it. It's completely pointless. So Zoom fatigue is a thing. You can't sit in front of a computer seeing videos of your colleagues every other day. It's gonna bore you bore the crap out of you. Sorry for my language, but yeah, don't do that. Weekly Zoom call is absolutely fine. Or if there's something urgent that you want to discuss that you can't really type it out, it's good to have an occasional call. But you don't really need to Zoom every day. It's pointless. You can instead do a daily check-in and a synchronous check-in. That's great. Now, some more task management tips. We are slowly getting towards the end. So one real problem that teams face is they end up in a deadlock. Should we do this? Should we do that? Should we make this more perfect? Should we make that interface more perfect? Should we make the code more perfect? Well, don't waste too much time on it. Try to take quick decisions. Like, you may make a mistake, but you can always correct it. So ship early, ship as quick as possible. And so since you're having these weekly check-ins and since you're having these regular updates, keep reevaluating and evaluating your goals. Evolve your goals. So sometimes you would notice that that there are things that have gone wrong in your original vision. So you can always experiment. So when you document these things, when you document everything, you can go back to what you wrote, what you discussed, and you get an idea about what went wrong and what really worked. And finally, implement a proactive feedback loop. What is a feedback loop? So a feedback loop is somebody identifies a problem with your, let's say, the software you're building, they report it to you, you look into it, and you take action based on it. So getting a feedback, taking action. That's what is called the feedback loop. So make sure you implement a very thorough feedback loop, because that is very critical to your project. Now, finally, accountability and feedback. So this is a very famous. I mean, I'm personally love Dilbert. So if you haven't watched Dilbert, please check out some of the Dilbert cartoons. They are very, very funny. So like in this case, the boss is literally asking Dilbert to take ownership of the failure. So this cartoon sort of, I mean, it's in a totally different line, but it sort of emphasizes the importance of accountability in your project. So everybody is working remotely, and each team member should be accountable to the work they do. And this does not just apply to the team; it applies to everybody. So set very clear expectations with your team members, and encourage proactive communication with your team. So each team member should be aware of what they need to do and how they should do that, and encourage each team member to communicate proactively. So if they want something to share, don't ask them to keep it at heart. Like, so if you're a team lead, you can directly ask people, hey, what's on your mind? You can share with me. We have this private space. I can totally help you out. So encourage that sort of proactivity and honesty and radical candor with your team. That is really going to help you out. And another tip that I've seen that really helps is ask each team member to set their own working style. So like get to know what will be their usual working times, how will they be working, and give them a process for escalating things. So let's say they run into a blocker, what should they do? So if you're starting off a team, this would be a great place to think about all of this. So you might run into specific things at specific points. So create a documentation to basically share all of these points, like address all of these things, and keep evaluating them as you go forward. Also, another thing, so before going to the other next section, another thing that I really want to touch upon is, since it's a distributed team, there is a lot of flexibility. Encourage your team members to be flexible, and encourage them to be on their own. So this really helps them become more productive. And finally, encourage a culture of feedback. I spoke about feedback loops. So make sure that every single person in your team is able to give feedback, and it could be on anything. So sometimes the feedback really helps improve the product or fix the gaps that you never knew existed. So everybody should be free to give feedback and to receive feedback, both on themselves and the product. And this is one very important thing that I want everybody to really focus on today. And if you don't take away anything else, I want you to take away this point: assume positive intent. So this is API. I'm sure a lot of you are going to work on the other API, application program interface, but you should keep this API in mind. Assume positive intent. So everybody that's working on your team, you're all working towards the same goal. You're not working against each other. So there is no office politics or the office style thing happening that's in your team. I'm pretty sure that's not happening. So everybody is working with good intentions in mind. So when somebody gives you feedback, it's not because they are malicious against you. So even if they are, it's good if you assume that way. That can really help you grow and succeed. So assume positive intent while you work. So this is basically life advice as well. And this is one thing I want you all to take away from here. And yes, finally, credits and public congrats. So make sure that even the smallest achievements are celebrated. So even if it's your product launch, or if it's your first 100 users or your first 1,000 users, celebrate the smallest thing. So in this COVID-19 pandemic, all of us are at home, stuck at home, and we don't get to see each other. So we're basically depressed by the number of increasing COVID cases and things like that. So in this, especially in this situation, and even after this, so celebrate even the smallest good thing that's happening in your team or in your company. You could do it in different ways. You could congratulate people in your Microsoft Teams or your Slack channel, or you could have a separate section where the achievements of each person is listed. Anything. So if you're a company, you could, I don't know, give an increment. So, but you don't really need to do that. There are people really feel valued when they are acknowledged. So at least give them some acknowledgement. That's a great way to do that. Now, what is great feedback? We're sort of getting short of time, so I'll quickly sum up. Great feedback is specific, timely, meaningful, and candid. It's goal oriented, and effective feedback is about the process and not about the person. So keep that in mind when you give feedback on somebody, or when somebody gives feedback on you. It's about the process and it's not on you. Don't take it personally, and make sure your feedback is specific, like directly intends to what you wanted to say, and it's meaningful. It has like that you intended what you meant to say. And finally, make sure that the feedback is constructive. So what does the person take away when you give feedback? What does so like make sure that it really helps the other person. And finally, all work and no play makes distributed teams dull. Trust me on this. So have a culture of fun. Like if you get to meet each other, I don't know, go out, do these meetings. So my company, we have this annual grand meetup where we mostly meet up in North America. We have a week of fun. So last year we met at Orlando. It was great. We went to the Marvel Island. We went to they basically booked the Harry Potter world for us. So it was amazing. So basically, I mean, you really need to do things like that. But maybe all of you, once the pandemic is over, maybe all of you could meet at least once a month. If you're very distributed, at least meet once a year or once in a few months to hang out and have some fun, or maybe go someplace like some hill station or some beach. Maybe go to Goa, have fun. So it's a great way to bond, because like you're only seeing these people as avatars on your computer. So when you get to meet your team members, it really helps. And fun is not necessarily meeting in person. Like you can have informal channels, like you can have informal groups to discuss things like probably your favorite movie and things like that. Or tools like Netflix allow you to watch movies together. So do something like find ways to celebrate and have fun, because life is, as I said earlier, you're not going to get out of this life alive, as Bugs Bunny said. All right, so I'm coming to the end of my session. I wanted to go. So I've basically shared a lot of things today, which seem like rhetoric. I want to show all of those to you in action. So as you all know, I work on the WordPress open source project, which is used by 30% of all the people in the world. And I'm going to show you how a feature was shipped in WordPress. And basically, it used all the techniques that I spoke of today. So the feature, before we get to that, I want to tell you how WordPress development works. All these things are, by the way, in the open, because WordPress is a public open source project. That's just like Linux. So communication in the WordPress project takes place in make.wordpress.org. You have a WordPress Slack instance, which is also public. All the development takes place in over GitHub and the WordPress core track. So don't worry about these links. I'll be sharing these slides later so that you can access these links and view them if you want to. So here's a story of how WordPress got XML sitemaps. So if you don't know what sitemaps are, it's a very useful tool in SEO. So you get a list of all the links in your site, and it'll really help SEO. So WordPress had plugins that allowed this, but as of June 2020, July 2020, this feature got shipped into WordPress core. So you don't need a plugin for this now. How did this happen? So a guy called Thierry Müller, he's a German guy. He's a contributor on the WordPress core team. So he first proposed this in the WordPress blog in June 2009. He wrote a post. He said, "Okay, how would we do this, guys?" So he basically wrote that post, and it got a lot of comments. People said, "Yes, let's do it." Everybody said, let's do it." All right, so they started working on it. The next thing they did is they created a feature plugin. So they didn't really ship the feature into core. So they built something, and they created a plugin for it. So if you not use WordPress, a plugin is something that you can add to WordPress to add functionality. So if you want to add e-commerce features to your site, you add a plugin for that. So if you want to add, I don't know, social networking, you add a plugin. So similarly, these folks, they developed a plugin for this, and they basically shipped this plugin. Right. So and the next thing they did is they continued development. So the development happened in the Make core blog, and discussion. They created a Slack channel in the WordPress Slack called Core Sitemaps, and the discussions happened there. And by the side, continued development happened in the Make core site. And finally, after a lot of discussions, there was a lot of action in GitHub. There were a lot of updates in the Make core blog, and so they did weekly meetings. So in every weekly meeting, they discussed how to go forward, and the developers independently, based on what was discussed in the meetings, discussed things. And all the meeting notes were published on the Make core blog. And finally, the feature was committed to GitHub, and it was committed to the WordPress track. And at the end, last but not the least, the announcement was made in the Make core blog, and the feature was shipped with WordPress 5.5. All right, so that's all what I wanted to talk to you about today. I hope I've not really exceeded my time. But yeah, these are some resources for you. I'll be sharing the slides again, as I said, so you can access all of it. And finally, thank you so much, everybody, for being so patient. And I hope I didn't bore you too much. And I hope you learned something from the session on how to manage your products in a distributed way. Thank you so much. Over to you, Vaishnavi.
Hi, Hari. Thank you so much. That was an amazing session.
Thank
By
you.
the way, Zoom fatigue is a pretty cool word that I learned today. Zoom fatigue is a pretty cool word I said that I learned from you today. I didn't know about that before. Also, amazing lines in your talk.
Thank you.
Het ledger in the morning is pretty sad, but okay. All right, so moving on to our question and answer session now. Is the first question from our attendees is from Anfas PV. How do you see the future of WordPress when an easily scalable Python framework like Django is becoming so popular?
Yeah. So that's an excellent question because there's a lot of debate happening on this in Twitter. So uh, you never. My direct answer is you never know. So WordPress currently is popular. It's 38% of the web, and it remains to be the easiest platform that is available. But you never know. I mean, things could happen. We've seen the world change. That's how the technology works. But at least in the next 5 years, I see WordPress growing and dominating because that's the trend that we've seen. But if a more popular platform comes up, and that is definitely possible, yes. And there's an ongoing debate on WordPress versus Jamstack. Jamstack, as you know, is JavaScript. So basically, JavaScript-based frameworks that can be used to build sites. So there's an ongoing debate on which one is more popular, and there is no answer to this question. So this is a question that really doesn't have an answer, but you never know. I mean, so if the Python framework that you said, if it gets really easy to build and if it gets really easy to scale, you never know. It might just cross WordPress. But for now, WordPress is leading the way. But let's see. Only time will tell.
Great. All right. So our next question is from Sriraj Rajendran saying, "What was the reason for working remotely even before the pandemic?" Oh yeah, fair question.
Okay. Oh, right. So first of all, Vaishnavi mentioned that I used to be in retail banking. I used to work with the State Bank of India. And it was a job I hated. I worked there for 2.5 years. I hated it like anything. I hated 9 to 5. So after joining Automatic, my life changed. I am independent. Like I get to choose my hours. I have the freedom to work from wherever I want. I work from the craziest places that you can. I don't want to really blow my trumpet, but I work from the craziest places imagine, and my life has changed really well. So, short answer: it's the flexibility and the freedom. That's why I chose remote work.
Great, that's absolutely true though. But all right, Vishnu Anil says, do you think an office environment is more productive than a virtual environment since all of your teammates are with you in the office? You don't have to wait for anyone to be free to get on a call. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is why I mentioned about the asynchronous communication part. So doing asynchronous communication really avoids this problem. So let's say you post a request for something and you don't mind. Unless it's something critical, you don't mind. Like they can reply whenever they want. So when you have a culture like that set up, we have something like that at Automatic. So I mean, I don't really mind waiting for the reply, but in some cases, this becomes a problem, especially due to time zone. So, for instance, I'm in India, and if I ask my colleague in the West Coast in Portland, Oregon, a question, they may not reply until tonight at 9:30, 8:30, 9:30 p.m. So that could be a problem, but asynchronous communication, solves it to a certain degree. And quick answer to that. So another one problem that we face is like sometimes you feel isolation because you don't get to meet your colleagues in person. That is real. That is totally real. I'll be honest about it. Some ways you can avoid that is by working with going to co-working spaces to work. There's a lot of them coming up in different places, including in Kochi where I live, and yeah, you can get to meet your colleagues. So we do that in Automatic twice a year. I get to meet my teammates and I get to meet the entire company. So that sort of helps it to a certain extent. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, that was a really good answer. So Ajal P asks, you were talking about communication. So if you have a teammate who's simply not willing to communicate, what in your experience, how would you deal with that?
Well, this is going to be a tough answer, but fire him. Because I didn't really say this in my talk, but being a remote worker requires a certain level of skill set. Like you need to be really independent. So that is one thing that you really need to scale yourself up to. You need to be extremely independent. You need to be able to take on tasks on your own without anybody's supervision. If you cannot do it, you're simply not fit for remote work. You can probably give this person a few reminders. You can have a friendly conversation with them saying, okay, dude, or my friend, please don't do this. This is sort of affecting the company. But if they keep to do it, just fire them. I've seen this happen. Like a friend of mine runs a startup. They had the same issue and they ended up firing the person and things are better now. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, so that's your answer, Ajal. Fire the person. All right, so I think any more questions there? All right. So last question is, how would you have fun with your teammates in the current scenario? I mean, the entire COVID.
Excellent question. So here's a couple of things that we do at Automatic. So we organize these pizza parties. So those are like once in a monthly calls where all of us join at Zoom. We play some virtual games and things like that. So you can actually play MMORPG games like virtually. It's a fun way to interact and have fun and things like that. So you can do that, or you can simply meet each other and talk about random stuff, like things not related to work, or you can play games. So there's a lot of things that you can do virtually to have fun. Or maybe you can even have discussion groups on things that you like. I don't know, movies, books, and things like that. So they eliminate that to a certain way. But in my experience, in my 4 years of working with Automattic, the most fun that I've had are at team meetups and at Gram meetups. I mean, my colleagues are amazing. So that's where the real fun is. I mean, meeting online, it's not great, but it still works.
I know, that was a nice answer, by the way. All right, so I think that's the questions from our volunteers, from our attendees, everyone. Once again, I'd like to thank you, Hari, for the amazing session and wonderful insights. I hope everyone out there enjoyed the session as well, because I certainly did. So Hari, we'll let you know if there's any other additional questions from the attendees. By the way, you can also log in to YouTube and you can directly comment there as well. Once again, thank you so much for being there with us today and make it. And it was an honor for us to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. So that was an amazing session. Let's move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker for the day is Amrit Sanjeev, staff developer advocate at Google with a demonstrated history of working in the internet industry, skilled in large systems development, Android OS, mobile applications, Java, Unix, and Linux. Amrit Sanjeev is a writer on Medium. Amrit proudly admits to being a geek, but even after all these years of coding experience, he still dedicates a lot of time to learning. As an early adopter of Android, this very zeal to learn made him the youngest architect for the Android platform development for IBM in the world. If you haven't checked out Paperboy, the app, it is about time that you did. So apps should look good, and not enough people emphasize on this is what Amrit lives by. Amrit is a proud alumnus of Cochin University of Science and Technology. So without wasting any more time, let's move on. Let's gear up to hear from Amrit on what he has to say about what makes a product successful. Welcome, Amrit, to Make It in 2020. Over to you. I think, Amrit, you're mute. Could you just unmute yourself?
Sorry, happens all the time.
I know, it's all right.
Yeah, let me quickly share my slide deck so that everybody gets to see what's there. Share the screen, share. Okay. This is a different screen from what I'm used to all the while. So,
I know, it's taking a while, but that's fine.
Quickly, this is going to be okay. Let me know if this is coming up correctly, and then I can quickly go on.
I think there's something on the screen. All right, it's there. Great. I can see the screen. All right, great.
Thanks. And thanks for the lovely introduction. That was pretty much one of the best introductions I've got so far. That covers a lot. Thank you. So basically what I wanted to kind of share this, I know you guys have been working on your products for some time. I thought, let me share some practical experience from the industry on what makes products successful and what you might want to consider when you're building products. None of this is like a rule book. This is more of my experience working with startups. There are a lot of startups in the country that we mentor, officially and unofficially. I work a lot on this aspect. So some of the common things that I've seen people making mistakes at, or not giving enough attention, and then they having to do a lot of work just to cover those ground, is basically going to be the area that we're going to talk about today. So hackathon to production. The whole idea is that in hackathons, we have a different mindset, but when you really want to kind of get an app to production and get a huge user base on it and making a product really successful, there are more aspects to it than just building the code, right? So I just wanted to cover some of those aspects. As engineers, we biased. I'm one myself, very strongly biased in certain ways. So as engineers, sometimes we do have these biases, and certain areas are not taken seriously enough, or we don't give enough attention to that. And that leads to a bit of confusion in terms of how why the product doesn't get successful, even though what you build is really good. So let's go through this set of slides. I have about 20 slides or so. I'll cover different aspects that we've seen with different people and different teams, and correcting them. We've seen a huge improvement for the user base, retention, things like that. So hopefully this is useful for you guys when you're going ahead and building production world apps. And let's jump right into the content now. So yeah, I think this is what I do as a day job. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I manage the India DevRel team, leading the partnerships space in the team. And like I said, I just want to share some of the anti-patterns that you see, certain patterns which people follow, but necessarily does not lead to the results. That's basically the anti-pattern model that we're talking about here. So firstly, I'm going to go straight into it because this is 20 slides, so it's going to take a while before I can cover everything, and I don't want to like run over things. And the first one is not clearly defining the problem. There's a lot of people who really work on the solution a lot without having a very strong clarity on what the problem they're trying to solve. It doesn't mean that they're dumb or anything. They're really smart people, but the lack of clarity on defining your problem kind of makes a solution go in directions which are not initially intended for. Just given you a screenshot of what are the common things that people actually have to look at, where, how, when people are using it, why people would use it, why would they return back to your product, why would they want to kind of use it more or suggest it to somebody else, what is a viral loop in your app. These are all things that actually are important. So having a clear definition of the problem is something that enables you to kind of come to a solution which is closer to solving the problem. Having a more vague aspect of it does not really help that. So do spend time on clearly defining the problem, understanding the different aspects of it, identifying those niche insights that allow you to make your product stand out from the existing solutions out there. Those are things that you really have to focus on. There are a lot of guys who work on the solutioning part of it really well and come up with great solutions, but then the market fit doesn't happen, or then that does not lead to a strong fit with the expectation of the user. I can give you one example here. We had a startup in Bangalore, which was basically catering for the taxi drivers. So this was going to kind of automatically rate the driving of a taxi driver and give them scores based on which they get incentivized and things like that. So driving more safer and more gentler in terms of how the car is getting used leads to a better result for them, and then a better monetization model behind that. So they get rewarded for basically driving more safe. They did the whole thing, completely tested, certified, everything was done. And then they started going to the first soft launch, and they went to the first 100 drivers. They started seeing that people were finding it difficult to use the app. They were pretty much perplexed because they did a lot of UX work on it, which made it very simple and things like that. But they were finding users having confusions. Certain points in their analytics showed that people had hesitation in continuing on certain actions and things like that. So they went back to the field and started talking to these drivers, and I started understanding where the gap is. And they realized one simple problem. Most drivers did not understand English really well, or they couldn't comprehend it really well. And many of them gave the comment that, hey, if you could do this, and this was in Bangalore, by the way, that the pilot happened. So the comment was that if you could actually do this in Kannada, I would be able to understand this better. They had to go back to the drawing board, change everything to Kannada, translate everything to Kannada, readjust the fonts, readjust the sizes, do the layouts in such a way that it fits the fonts correctly. They had to proofread the whole, they had to get the app proofread again, come by a person who understood the language really well, go back. This set them back by about 6 to 8 weeks. This was a problem that could have very quickly be resolved if they had asked this question early on in their product lifecycle. And that's 8 weeks could have been saved, because if they had asked that question, it's very easy for them to implement it as they were doing it. They just optimized it so well for a certain language and realized that, oh, this is not the language that is coming in use when people want actually. So the gap between what people could use it with or wanted to what they gave, even though the solution was good, the crash rates were, or there were no crashes at all sort of a thing, the solution was solid. Stability was good. It worked under low memory. It worked under flaky network. All the technical aspects were taken care of. But a simple thing like language, caused all the confusion for people. So understand and define the problem really, really well. Don't miss that part. Even in hackathons, when a couple of us were doing it way back, when hackathons were more of a social event than a competition, we used to spend literally the first 6 hours defining what we wanted to do and how and what are the boundaries in which we want to build it, because this was a time boxed thing. Again, we want to kind of ensure that we do a good solution. And definitely we wanted to define the problem clearly, identify what we will solve, what we would not solve really well. So, and that had good success for many of us. So I would strongly urge you guys to do this going further. Next, not understanding the product type. So this is a classic thing. I didn't invent it. This was something that is there in the product space, which is called a painkiller versus a vitamin thing. Painkiller is something that you definitely need to have. That's an app that you definitely need. Something like Google Maps, it solves a real pain point of navigation. Whereas a vitamin is something like a nice to have. It could be a Google Fit could be a vitamin. It's a nice to have thing. If you have it, it can improve an existing solution of tracking your fitness goals. But necessarily, it's not like you can't live without it. You have to understand this classic difference between what are you trying to solve. One other way of thinking about it is that you really don't want to solve a lot of problems. The pain point is what you really want to solve. And the frills around it, the bells and whistles around it are more like the vitamins. So having more features necessarily doesn't mean that your app is better, or your solution is better, unless and until it solves its real pain problem. Now, a good solution, and this is like the very classic way of explaining it, but if you think about it a little further, right? A good solution usually comes and helps you, starts off like a vitamin and then becomes a painkiller, because it basically comes like something that will help you do something better, and it looks more like a nice to have. But as you use it more and more, the habit is formed, and then it is something that you can't live without. That is more of a solution that you should aim for, because something that is added in the whole point of let me try this out is very low in terms of a vitamin sort of a problem space, whereas in a painkiller, there's a more risk of actually disappointing yourself or investing a lot into it before you can actually start seeing what the effect is. But something that starts off with a low entry barrier and then becomes something that you can't live without is basically a great product. So define which type you want to start with and how you want to do that, and then focus on that exact need. The reason why I say you need to understand these two types is because the way you kind of define the problem, retain the user, do your marketing, everything changes for these two types. It also shows how you want to kind of showcase your app, as what category you want to put it in. Do you want it to bring in like a lifestyle app or lifestyle solution, or is it an absolute necessity solution sort of a thing? So you really can actually change your narrative and how people see it and how people experience it just by defining the type of the product you're building. The other classic example, not evaluating all the tech options. In the real world, there are more than one way of doing something really well. So the two right ways. It's very easy to kind of decide between the right way and the wrong way. But when choices are there between two ways of doing it, then you have a problem. Should you use Flutter, or should you use React Native, or should you go native? All of them solve the problem, but then you got to decide it. Don't make choices on what looks really cool. Make decisions based on timelines, your team's capability, what is the long-term impact, how flexible your solution would be. Make tech options based on that. Even if it's the more boring option, if that's what fits your problem, then please ensure that you actually pick it accordingly. So learn to make those hard decisions and stand by it and learn from that sort of a thing. There could be mistakes that you'll make initially, but then those mistakes will actually help you learn and understand what you might want to improve in your decision-making process. Experimenting to learn. This is something that I've seen many startups do, and I really kind of struggle to understand the rationale for this. Is when you're building a solution, the focus is about building the solution. It's about solving a problem. It's not about trying to look cool or trying to use a technology that you never knew. So if you're building say an Android app, for example, and you don't know Kotlin, you have a tight deadline, and to roll out, maybe Kotlin is not the best choice. Java might be a better choice because that's a tech that you already know. So experimenting to learn, it's great in your college days. It's great when you have the time for it, but not when you have tight deadlines and expectations from users to fix things really quickly or move the needle, or release features really fast at a much higher velocity. Don't do things like, okay, pick up a completely new language or pick up a library that you've never used. You will encounter more problems to solve than what you already have in your hand, and that'll add more variables to what you need to solve. And it's just going to be a time sink at the end of the day. Not shipping code fast enough. This is something that we always tell people to do. Working code, that's the key word here. Okay, I really want to underscore it and high emphasize on it, is that if you're not shipping features fast enough, then you are not doing good enough. Is something a week might, depending on the problem, like every week might not be possible, but then that's more like a phrase that we use. If you're not doing it on a weekly basis, then you're not doing good enough. You're not trying really hard. And again, work on the USP more than on the bells and whistles. That really does help because it adds value. Bells and whistles don't add the same amount of value as your core functionality, improving your core functionality does. Working code, don't do this without test cases. One of the classic things that developers do is actually not write enough test cases for code. In the real world, if things have to crash, they'll crash badly. So without test cases, without Crashlytics or any crash reporting tool, without analytics, it's exceptionally difficult for you to kind of navigate the real world problems. So please ensure that you do the due diligence. Even if it's going to take another day, do the due diligence, write the test cases, run them. I cannot emphasize more on testing. This is because developers don't like testing in a general sense. But in any good company that you go, the first thing they'll ask you to do is to write the test cases for a problem, not write the code for it. So you really will have to learn to get into the habit of thinking of the cases where you will fail, and then you will automatically write code which works around that problem. Writing throwaway code. This is something I see in hackathons being like a Achilles heel, where they write code which is not good, which cannot definitely go to production. Now, the way you have to think about it is that, and with good intentions, okay, the whole idea is, oh, if it's good, we'll rewrite it. If we win it or we need to send it to production, we'll rewrite it. You put it out there in the real world. If you hit success, you'll never have the time to rewrite the whole thing. If you don't hit success, you absolutely have no need to rewrite it. So writing throwaway code doesn't help at all. So have a minimum standard at which you're writing code. Do not change this too often. Please be sure that there is a certain amount of time that developers need to kind of do it, and that gets communicated to everybody. And you write a decent set code that can be, say, if you want to kind of improve upon it, or if you kind of want to make this a little better, you still can do it with a reasonable effort, not a complete rewrite. So don't do this where you lower your standard just to meet deadlines. You might want to reduce the features, keep your standard good enough, and then put it out there. Because if it's a success, if it works really well, whatever you've given, that becomes a better measure of the product than actually having something that fails regularly with a lot of features and complications around it. The other mistake, overgeneralization. When you write code, define APIs, define your server-side implementations and things like that, there's a lot of time wasted in terms of defining it to be extremely general. Oh, this is a function that will take an integer. Oh, what will happen if tomorrow somebody wants to do it with a string? That's a very small example of what I'm saying. But unless and until you can foresee that in the next 2 months, somebody is going to do it exactly as you envision it, don't overgeneralize it. Something that could actually take two integers, if you templatize that function to take anything, your test cases are going to be much more complicated. Your testing is going to take more time. And you most probably will end up refactoring that before somebody reuses it, which means you've spent a lot of time making it work for situations that never occurred will never occur in future. But you did with good intentions. Use the right tools to solve problems. If a pen and paper is good, go do that. You don't have to do that with Excel. If you don't really have to kind of do everything with tech. Sometimes by thinking out of the box, you might come up with solutions which will save time. We are always running against time when we are doing products because we have to release to the market fast enough, right? So overgeneralization on the code level, on a abstraction level, things like that really does hit you hard. It really comes back and bites you. So in terms of the time lost, really control yourself from the effort of not doing it now and doing it later. Have that balance in terms of how you're doing. And then trying to create information without data. This is, again, comes back to the first point of what are you trying to build? Do you have a feedback loop that comes from the users? Do you have analytics that you can rely on? Do you have crash reporting? Do you have performance monitoring? These are all real world tools that you want to add to your product so that you understand how the product is getting used, what people feel like, where the product is failing, and where the product can improve. You really need to have these tools definitely inbuilt into the app. There's a lot of times where you will actually get great insights from users. I'll give you an example. In Paperboy, the application that we were talking about earlier, it was a newsreader app. Way back in 2011 or something is when I wrote that. And a lot of people used it, about 60 or 70,000 people used it at that time. And I used to keep getting comments once in a while saying, can you improve the readability a little bit? And I was working on fonting. I was working on colors. I was working on the weights of fonts, different fonts. I tried many things, but this thing kept constantly creeping up once in a while. So and I was looking through analytics all the time. And then I suddenly realized that most of the users use this application at night. And my screen was a bright, it wasn't off-white, it's not like pure white, but off-white screen with black text on it, which was looking very like print, very nicely laid out and simple to read. But the whole idea was that they are reading at night and that screen might be too bright. Then I switched to a dark mode. So I wrote a simple feature which enabled it to switch based on time. So it analyzed how bright the room was and just switched it to a dark mode. Immediately readership, like I could literally see in the first week that I released it, after a week of releasing it, 35% was an increase in terms of the reader time. Somebody reading it for 10 minutes was now reading it for 13.5 minutes. So that sort of a change happened, and people started, who were earlier complaining about this, started upgrading the app. So analytics allowed me to understand the nuance. No user was telling me this straight to my face, that, hey, I needed to be a black screen in which white text would come, or a dark screen in which bright text would come. But analytics actually gave me the hint. Crash reporting, for example, your systems will fail in real world under different conditions. Especially mobile apps, if you're building, they will have a variety of hardware on which it's running, a variety of device parameter settings under different network conditions, under different environmental conditions. You will start seeing problems which you can never replicate on your in your lab or in your office space. So really, really important that you have an understanding of what happens. Don't let the users complain about the problem. A user, when he says, hey, I found this problem, and you're replying back saying that I have already fixed it for the next version, is a more delighted user than somebody who thinks that, oh, this developer has no clue of what he's doing. So please do use these tools in your app products. Again, not utilizing tools, for example, that's another classy example. People love to build it in-house, everything. There are many tools that you could use to kind of offload a lot of work. Simple thing like running a survey. You could embed a Google form within an app and run the survey very, very easily. You don't really have to build an entire screen. You don't really have, when you change the survey, when you change a value, you don't have to redeploy your application. You could embed a Google form within a web view and then run that. It's a classic example. Firebase is another place where you could actually use a lot of these standard tools, remote configuration. These are all tools that we used to build earlier for server-side applications. I mean, it was part of the development lifecycle of a product. Now they're there as libraries, they're there as third-party services, which you can just plug and play into your solutions and make your solutions immediately have those functionality. So please do use the tools that are available for you. Reinventing the wheel. Developers love to kind of do this all the time. That's why we keep seeing image loading libraries, networking libraries keep propping up all the time. And the reason for this is because people love that technical challenge of solving a problem and understanding the nuances of it. Some people do have different reasons why they do solve the same problem again. That could be to just get an understanding of a better space, or understanding of the problem space a little better. But majority of the time, it's just an ego boost. Oh, I will write a library which is slightly better than the previous one. Reinventing the wheel does not really help a lot. So be aware of the services and applications that are out there. Open source libraries are there. Please do read through open source libraries. Most people just blindly use them in their application. You really will end up in trouble if you do that, because one, you don't know what's written inside, means you don't know how it's getting executed. So it's like a black box to it. It could be doing something for which your app has to pay for it. It could be doing a policy violation. You get kicked out of Play. Your app gets kicked out of Play Store or Google App Store, or get blacklisted by a site or things like that. So you really have to look at it. Don't go with the not invented here syndrome. That's the NIH syndrome that we're talking about here. So if you can reuse something, go ahead and reuse it. As long as the licenses allow you to do that, please go ahead and reuse it. When you reuse it, do understand very clearly how that works. Don't just blindly go and just copy paste code and then run it. Do understand how it works. Maybe there's an optimization you can do for the situation you're working on. Many open source libraries are built with the intent of being very general. Now, the situation that we might use within the app is not that general, which means there is a lot of possibility of optimizing it just to the conditions, because the boundary conditions are much more narrower. You might be able to optimize it a lot better. So do take advantage of that. This is something that we hear all the time, misusing AI and ML and interchanging these words all the time. Machine learning is commonly used as a point where people don't know how to solve a problem. So they say, oh, we'll solve it with machine learning. This doesn't fool anybody. Unless and until you guys have the data sets around it, you're never going to start solving the problem. So if you say this to any person during a hackathon, they're going to say, what is your data set size? And you say 100 points or 1,000 points of data, that your whole story falls right on its face then and there. Because everybody who's worked on these AI spaces know that unless you have a ton of data, you're not going to get anything meaningful out of it. So please don't misuse it. This gets misused for everything lately. I think it's like a buzzword, so everybody loves to use it. Oh, I'm doing this ML thing which will do Hello World. You don't need ML for Hello World. But it sounds cool, so people put it there. Just don't do that. If it's a good judge, they will ask you the right questions, and then your whole story falls apart. You might be better off not using these fancy words or trying to push technology into a place where it's not needed, and most probably win a product, win maybe interest from a VC or another entrepreneur by being truthful about it. The other one is trying to scale prematurely. This happens all the time when you're deciding server-side code. Oh yeah, what happens if we have 1 million users tomorrow morning? Most solutions don't have 1 million users tomorrow morning. It takes time to get acceptance to that level. So you might have enough time to start with, say, 10,000 users and then see a growth trajectory for the first few weeks. And if it is really high, then scale things up. So you might not end up building a solution. So a solution that works for a couple of 100 million users is going to be quite differently architected from a solution that gets built for, say, 20,000 or 50,000 or say 100,000 users. They have to have different architectures, because otherwise you can't get the scale that you expect. But that requires substantial investment, both in hardware as well as software stack changes. And doing that too prematurely is just investing money on things that you don't see as or are not aware as a problem today. So you want to really, really look at where you're putting your money, and don't change things because you have a long-term vision. And I'm not saying that you should not have a long-term vision. Definitely you should have one, but also have an estimate of how quickly you're going to get there. Don't say, oh, we want to get to 10 million users. That's a lovely, but the better statement is we want to get to 10 million users, and with our current growth trajectory, we are going to do this in 18 months. That is a better statement than saying we will somewhere in future get to 10 million users. So just ensure that this works. I mean, you understand the scale. The scale problem also has a time scale to it. So understand this time scale part of it really well. You shouldn't ignore the help around you. there is a lot of help around you. Most people use Stack Overflow a lot, and yeah, I understand most developers use that quite extensively. But you can also participate in community events. Like I became a kernel developer because of the Linux user group back in Cochin. They were the ones at that time who helped me get into the space. This was way back. I think I passed out in 2003. So you can understand, early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of these hype on social media. There wasn't much of social media, to be honest. There was not much of these sort of events that happen and networking opportunities. So Linux user group was one of those technical groups where people actually helped each other solve the problems they had. And there were amazing developers there. And those are the ones who actually got me into the whole thing. And that pretty much worked very well for me because I landed a job because of that skill. And then went on to doing that for quite some time, moving on to architecture and things like that. So there is multiple programs like, and I'm just calling out the Google ones, but that doesn't mean that's the only ones out there. There's Google Developer Groups, there's Google Developer Experts program, and similarly Microsoft, Facebook, all these guys have programs. Whichever suits you, whichever you like, please go and join that community and learn from everybody's experience. Don't just rely on only the problems that you see or you experience. And it's also a great place to get early feedback. If you create an app, and we used to do that, we used to actually showcase in the Google Developer Group that I used to run in Bangalore. We still run that, BLR Droid. I was one of the founders of it. So one of the early things that we used to do was that at the end of every meeting that we had, which is a monthly meet, people who wrote apps would come there and demonstrate their apps, and they would get feedback from people. There were so many things that were insights that they got, which allowed them to be better prepared for what real world users expected the apps to be. So that's something that definitely resonates with me really well. I've also used that channel. So rather than asking your mom or your sister or brother about your app, go to a community like this and then go and showcase your solution. You will get real world feedback, and you'll also get people who are very honest with you. They're not going to say a sugar-coated answer because they don't need to, one thing, and that's not the expectation in that sort of a setting. So they will give you good feedback there. Not investing in marketing. I know this sounds like a little tricky for most developers, or developers like marketing. Why? My job is to do create the solution. If you're looking at writing just technical solutions to a problem, maybe marketing is not something you need to spend time on. But if you want to make products successful, you need to do marketing. There's no way around it. It's a way of engaging your users. It's a way of building trust with people, and it's also a communication channel to your users, right? So marketing is not something you can ignore. A lot of people think that if I write something really good that meets the market's need, my product will be automatically successful. If that was the case, established brands like Facebook, Google, Colgate, Harley Davidson, Ferrari would never actually do marketing. And if you look at it, they still do marketing, right? So it is essential. It is essential just not from user acquisition perspective, but from many other angles. So yeah, a good solution, if you really want to take it to the market and become successful with it, yes, marketing is something that you cannot completely ignore. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but you cannot ignore that aspect of it. Oops. I'm sorry. Yeah, bells and whistles. This is another thing that I want to quickly touch upon, because a lot of times we see hackathon solutions coming out where they're trying to do 10 features. So the solution, the explanation will be like, this is an app or this is a solution that does this, where this is the user's problem and this is how we solve. But this also does this, that, and other thing. The rest of the things don't matter. It's like the bells and whistles don't really always sell products. If your original solution is solution to your problem works really well, that's the only time when the bells and whistles really matter. If you have a car that does not start, but you have amazing tires on it, you have great paint on it, it looks beautiful, it's got great headlights, I don't think you're going to buy the car. That's how it is. The bells and whistles are something people love to do to kind of add new features. We can do that also. Just because you could do something doesn't mean that the user needs it and user sees value in it. So bells and whistles, something you definitely don't want to add unless and until you really think it adds value to the core proposition of your current app. Decide whether it's a nice to have or a must have. and again, avoid building for one user. This is something that I keep hearing all the time, and most people make this amazing mistake, where one user will come in, we give you a really bad rating, shout really loud, write very offensively, saying that I expected this feature and this feature is not there. This must be an app that might have another 1,000 users on it. One user complains, you make that change because you're hearing that negative feedback a lot. So you went ahead to satisfy one user, you made a change to your product. You have to understand that 999 did not complain about your product. So before changing for one user, you really need to check whether it is really necessary for the other 999. If more people say that, or more people resonate to the sentiment that this one user is actually saying, then you want to go change it. Don't change the app. And the worst situation that you can be is that you change this for that one person, and that guy loves it, and the other 999 hates it. So don't build solutions for one user. You might want to kind of understand if more users have the need. Everybody's expectations are different from solutions. You cannot build one size fits all sort of solutions. They don't really become effective. So you have to cater for a certain demography, and there will be certain people who will never like that product. There will be certain features who will always love the product. You got to decide. You got to really optimize on the people who are working with your philosophy of the product and your solution, and then take it further. And then one of the last things that I want to kind of talk about here is a habit forming loop. This is something that is a standard thing, a trigger, action, reward, investment model, which is also called as a loop or a hook in the product world. This is something that you really want to kind of do. If you miss a habit forming loop within your app, your usage actually drops drastically over a period of time. When you talk about what triggers the user to come into your app, is that a notification? Is that a reminder? Is that a sound? Is that an external event? You got to really define what is a trigger. It could be an internal trigger or it could be an external trigger. Internal trigger are emotional triggers that a user has to do it, and external triggers are basically things like notification, your way of sending a mail to the user and triggering them to do it. Action is what is the simplest behavior that the user can do to get the reward. Again, when you look at reward is something that you don't want to be constantly giving. You want to make it variable. It's the same thing like you see a nice picture on your timeline and you click on it, then it takes you to the app, to the article. Whether the article is good or not cannot be judged by the image, but your anticipation that the article might be good is what takes you to that article, makes you click, right? So there's a variability in reward that is there. You really want to build a thing like that, because that kind of makes people, even if their expectation gets missed, maybe the next one is better. That's why streams like Facebook's timeline or Twitter timelines, we do click on things even though we don't know a complete picture of what we're going to get out of that, because of the variable reward it has. So you want to bring that habit forming loop into it. And the investment part is what is a bit of work that has to be done in order to increase this likelihood of returning back. So you want to make that user come back to your application, not just with a trigger, but you want the user to invest a little bit into it. The same way that if you are using any habit forming thing, like say you look at your steps, a step counter from Google Fit, for example, you really want to kind of reward the user with badges and things like that. So that doesn't happen like, yeah, every 1,000 steps you get a reward. No, it happens once in a while when you really are not expecting that, and that's a variable reward that you're getting, and people are very happy with that. So with the expectation of the reward, people just keep pushing themselves. Investment is what's a bit minimum work that they have to do to get the trigger becoming a little better. So habit forming loops are extremely important. Because this is something, the viral loop or the habit forming loop is something that most people don't add into their app, even though the solution is very effective. Its effects start diminishing because people don't return back to it. The world is full of distractions. If you're one of the apps on a mobile phone, for example, an example of mobile app, you're one of the apps on the mobile phone. An average user in India has more apps, actually 30 or 32 apps on the device. All of them are trying to get attention. Something like WhatsApp will get a lot of attention because it has a higher amount of usage. So you are competing with that level of apps, right? So if you want to really get attention, you really need to make this a habit forming loop. And recapping, all these small things add to making a great product. Working on one of these things don't really do much. It's all these small inches that adding to a mile. So some of these things might be topics that you're already working on and you don't have an issue with. Some of them might be things that you are missing. Maybe you want to work on them and see if your solution improves. Like I said, it's not a rule book. It's just a general guideline of things that people miss. You might be missing some, you might not be missing some. There might be certain things which your product does not resonate with really well. Don't do those things. But generally, these are things that definitely get work. I mean, definitely improve products. And I've seen people using these techniques and improving products and making a better retention and better financial outcomes for themselves. So hopefully this is useful. And lastly, pay it forward. You really, if you learn how this is done and you figure out a new way and you make success out of that, please do share it with others. The reason I call this out is because I don't see that happening very often in our community of engineers here. We don't really value paying it forward much. We really try to just look forward and keep going our way. That's not a great way of building communities and building relationships and sharing your success with everybody. There's enough for everyone out there. So do pay forward. Share your insights with others. It doesn't make you any smaller. It only makes you much bigger. And put effort behind others also. So if you're successful, help somebody else become successful too. And with that, I'll close my session. If there are questions that come up after the talk, when you think about these problems or think about the things that I said, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. That's the fastest way of reaching out. My Twitter handle is there on the screen. And I usually write only tech stuff in Twitter. So if you want to follow more of mobile or mobile on Google, usually mobile stuff, Android, Flutter, those sort of stuff is what I actually post content on. So if that's also of interest, please feel free to follow and ask me questions there. I hope this was useful. I did take a few minutes more than I expected, but hopefully this will help you build better products in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrit. That was a wonderful talk. I think everyone enjoyed the session because I really did. All right, so we'll move on to the question answer session now. I think a few of our attendees on YouTube have a few questions for you. So
Yeah, sure.
Anonymous asks, to what extent will software engineering be replaced by machine learning automation and AI in the next 10 years or more? Oh.
So there would be a certain part of it which I'm a little towards the ML side of things, I guess. Working in a company like Google, we see that a lot, and we see the possibilities a lot more. But I wouldn't say that it's not going to replace people. There are certain things that machines can be really, really good at, and there are certain things that humans can be extremely good at. I wouldn't feel like we're going to see this replacement sort of a situation coming in anytime soon, primarily because what we're trying to do is things we are bad at, we want machines to do, and machines are good at, we're trying to make them do. Machines are great at seeing through tons of data and going through tons of data really fast, understanding patterns in them, and making more abstract decisions. But when it comes to creativity, when it comes to improving, like thinking out of the box, there are a lot of those sort of cognitive and general intelligence sort of, it's called just, the area is called general field intelligence, and those sort of things we are extremely good at. So if we are trying to do the same things that we did 10 years back, we are less relevant today. It's exactly the same wave with this. This is another wave of technology change, which will need you to adapt to that, change the problem sets that you work on, but doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to get replaced by machines. I don't see that Terminator sort of model of world anywhere close by.
All right, thank you so much. So, right, the next question is from Neeraj Jairaj. More and more services and tools are coming up, Firebase, teachable machines, etc. Do you think it is now pointless for developers to create solutions themselves?
No, I wouldn't say that. But one of the things that developers should understand is that solving smaller problems does not make them, continuously solving problems that already are solved does not make them any better. So one classic example or one classic mistake I see engineers who want to continue in engineering, okay, like if you really are going to become like a staff engineer, a principal engineer, an architect, a senior architect, and be in the technical line of work, which is to do with engineering, core engineering, you have to continuously start solving problems that are more complicated as you go. A lot of times, the industry or the company that you work with might not have that sort of complexity of work, and we have seen that in the services industry. A lot of people turn to managers after 5 to 6 years is not because manager job is a much better job. It's basically because they're getting bored with engineering, solving the same level of technical problems coming. But it's not the case anymore. We see amazing problem sets getting solved by people here. We are focusing a lot on the local problems right now. So hyper local problems that I mean, which are very specific to our region, our environment and things like that. But the whole idea is identifying those problem sets and working on them is very important. You cannot get success by doing something that's already solved. That's where I would come to. Like, if Firebase is solving a solution, rebuilding it doesn't make a lot of sense. But having an understanding of how it is built, because Firebase is also built by engineers, it did not come up on its own, right? So we also need people who build these sort of things. There is a clear differentiation between people who really build solutions that are user-facing and infrastructure development. That's a little different. Somebody who's building a Google app engine itself is a very different breed of developer from the person who's building say, mobile application using the Google app engine. Then I've seen that more closely in my career because of the fact that I was an OS developer and I was working on the Android OS stack. And most of my friends and my colleagues, or rather people I was interacting with, was working on Android app stack. The conditions that I would actually think of are not their priorities. So when I switched over from the OS stack to dealing with people who are, or managing people who are working on the app space, there was this difference of thinking, or rather I had to adapt myself to think differently, because the criteria for them, where I would look at, oh, what's the memory usage on it? Are you using all the cores really well? Are you having any contention on the threading model and all that? Those are not concerns for an app developer as such. So yes, it depends on what you're doing, but don't try to solve things that are already solved, except for in an academic perspective.
Right. All right. Thank you. So next question is, can a mechanical engineer enter Google? I think that's the
Anybody
question.
can enter Google. I mean, like, with all seriousness, yes, we don't have a criteria saying that only computer science grads or a certain type of graduates should come into our company. There are people like my lead, for example, a global lead for, so I manage India. There is a person who I report to who manages the globally team. She's an architect by profession. She's not even a computer science grad. She picked up all these skills. She's an amazing coder, by the way. I mean, I'm surprised how well she codes. But she was an architect by profession. That's what she learned, and then she picked up programming, and then that's how she made her career. So it doesn't mean that if you're a mechanical engineer, you have a disadvantage. The only thing that I would suggest is that you're going to be evaluated the same way. Do understand you're going to be evaluated the same way as a computer science engineer is. So being a mechanical engineer or being a civil engineer does not give you any, it doesn't make it any easier. You might have to work hard to match to everybody else. But as long as you are good, we are welcome. We will welcome anybody.
That's probably an answer for half of my college. All right, so great answer. So the next question is by Niranjana. How well do you think Google is able to manage the impact of persuasive technology? Clearly
Somebody's seen a Netflix Social Dilemma. No, I did watch that one too, but that is a larger conversation. I don't think I'd be able to answer that in such, or do any justice to that in a short period of time. Most probably I'll shoot myself in the foot, which I'll avoid by not opening my mouth about it. Maybe in a one-to-one setting I can explain more about that.
All right, so skipping this question, then next question is, all right, I think that's the question, I guess. Yeah, all right, just give me a minute. All right, so there's one or two more questions from our community. So as one of our community members, what advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career? Since all of us are at the pretty, starting phase of our career, so what advice would you give your younger self?
I would say I was very focused on certain aspects of engineering, like programming and OS internals and things like that. Today, I would say a little more broader approach would help. It did not serve me very bad, to be honest, and I think there's a little bit of luck on my side for that. It's not my talent that kept me out of trouble. It was a little bit of luck. But today, if I would start in today's environment, two things I would definitely say. Don't succumb to the pressure of social media. Everybody wants to be a speaker today. Everybody wants to go talk at conferences. There's this huge social pressure of being very visible as an engineer. That wasn't the case earlier. For us, we could just sit code for 16 hours a day if we had to and not be distracted by things. But today, the distraction level is exceptionally high. You have to learn things to go and communicate to people. Repeating somebody else doesn't add any value. No matter how eloquently you put it out there or how nicely you present out there, if it's not your original idea, I mean, it doesn't need to be original idea, but it's not your insights and your experience that you're sharing, people will very quickly see through that. Most of us say this very clearly, that engineers have a great bullshit detector. So if you are actually going and bullshitting in front of an engineering audience, trust me, they'll pick it up in the first few minutes, and then you can see them disengaging very quickly. So social media pressure. Secondly, definitely focus on the fundamentals. A lot of subjects don't. I mean, like any other student, I don't know if my professors are going to not hate me for saying this, but like any other students, a student out there, I also felt, why am I learning these things? Where is in my life am I going to use this sort of stuff? But trust me, those 52 subjects in engineering, they somewhere or the other come up in your life. And when you try to specialize on something, those abstract ideas do help. Like we had a subject called Principles of Programming Language. For some things, I was fascinated by that. But even today, when I look back, when I study a new language, I relate to what I learned at that point of time. I learned it a little well, I think, because I was fascinated by that. It was a very abstract subject. The other one I could say, which helped me a lot, was compiler. And there was one which was about compiler design. We had a subject called compiler design. It might have changed. Syllabus is like, I'm like 20 years apart. So syllabus must have changed. But when I went and started working on the OS, the compiler design part of it literally helped me understand a lot of optimization techniques and a lot of things that worked under the hood a lot better. So learning your subjects, like, it's very cliche to say this, but trust me, learning it well definitely helps some way or the other. And things that I did not learn really well, I regret that now. I mean, I have to learn it. Like, honestly, if you don't learn it in engineering and you go to a job, you learn it at job. So it's better to learn it when you're supposed to. That's how I would do it.
Right, great. All right, so we'll wind up the question and answer session with this. All right, thank you, Amrit, once again. That was an amazing session and wonderful insights on the question answers. I hope all of the attendees on YouTube also enjoyed the session as well. So Amrit, we'll let you know if there are any other additional questions from the attendees. You can also log into YouTube and you can directly comment there as well. Once again, thank you so much for joining us here on Make-It-In today. It was an honor for us to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, so with that, we come to the end of our 2 technical sessions. I hope that all of you had an exciting day today, meeting so many interesting people and attending so many insightful sessions. We'll be resuming with the hackathon. The second milestone check will start at 1:15 p.m. I repeat, the second milestone check will start at 1:15 p.m. All the very best to all of our participants of the hackathon. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you have a great day ahead.